Situated between the northern and southern peninsulas of Michigan, in Lake
Huron,
is a little island where time seems to have been brought to a standstill, where cars are forbidden and much of the native landscape remains meticulously preserved as a national park. One of the biggest draws of
Mackinac
Island is the Grand Hotel, where every fall, a group of people come together while wearing the clothes of the early 1900s to celebrate a romantic portrait of the past, a film about time travel that was made on this island 40 years ago. It is June 27th, 1912. Your mind accepts this completely. It is June 27th, 1912, and you are in your room at the Grand Hotel. At this very moment, the actress Elise McKenna is staying at the hotel, waiting to meet you, though she doesn't know it yet. It is June 27th, 1912, and you have just traveled from the future to find the woman of your dreams, to have a love affair across time itself. It is June 27th, 1912. It is June 27th, 1912. Before we really get started, if you could please hit that like button, it would keep me from being tied up in YouTube obscurity. If you really do like what I'm doing, be sure to subscribe to the channel to get more content. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. In the early 70s, the author Richard Matheson, famous for writing The Shrinking Man and Hell House, as well as several episodes of The Twilight Zone, was inspired by a portrait of actress Maud Adams to write Bid Time Return, a novel about a screenwriter dying of an inoperable brain tumor who falls in love with a portrait of a young actress named Elise McKenna, and then pushes his consciousness backwards through time in order to be with her. When it was published in 1975, the novel wasn't much of a commercial success, but it did find its way into the hands of producer Stephen Deutsch, who absolutely loved it and was convinced it could make a good movie. Deutsch worked tirelessly with Richard Matheson to get the movie made, and though Universal bought the rights, the studio was lukewarm on it and Deutsch had a hard time finding a director who was interested. Sometime later, the French-American director Juno Swark, known primarily for his television work, had just finished Jaws 2 and was eager to direct another Hollywood film for Universal. However, he didn't want to make another big-budget action movie, so when he went to producer Ray Stark looking for his next project, he said he wanted something smaller, something quiet and romantic. Stark put him in touch with Deutsch, and after reading Bid Time Return that night, Swark agreed to direct the film adaptation the next day. Matheson himself wrote the screenplay, and during pre-production the title was changed to Somewhere in Time, largely because the original title, Bid Time Return, taken from Shakespeare's Richard II, was too archaic and ungainly for a Hollywood film. Matheson also made a few changes to the story in order for it to work as a movie. For example, both Matheson and Swark agreed that terminal illnesses rarely work on film, so Matheson cut the brain tumor out of the plot and instead had the hero die of grief, which is more medically plausible than you might assume. Most of the other changes aren't all that significant, but if you want to know more, I break it all down in my written reviews on my website at emcgill.com. With Matheson plugging away, Swark was enthusiastic to get started, but the production met resistance from the studio, which still wasn't sold on the film and didn't really want to make it. Swark, who had to remind the studio of the incredible box office performance of his previous film, Jaws 2, was only able to move forward after agreeing to have the budget cut in half to a measly $4 million, which was unthinkably small for a period drama of the time. To save money, Swark was determined to film almost entirely on location, but when he went to scout out the setting of the novel, the Hotel del Coronado outside of San Diego, he knew it wouldn't work. The hotel had too much modernization, things like visible power lines, aerials, aluminum windows, a high-rise convention center, and an overflowing parking lot. So he and the crew immediately began looking for other historic waterfront hotels throughout America. It didn't take them long to find the Grand Hotel on
Mackinac
Island, a place where modernization is frowned upon. With the first draft of the script completed and the location agreed upon, next came casting. For the male lead, Richard Collier, Christopher Reeve was immediately put at the top of the list. However, fresh off the heels of Superman, Reeve's agent refused to even give the script to his client, laughing off the paltry sum on offer. Stephen Deutsch then surreptitiously slipped the script to Reeve at a hotel room, and after Reeve read it and liked it, Deutsch and Swark convinced him to take the part, even though they couldn't pay him as much as he was worth. Reeve was being offered dozens of jobs at the time, but they were all physical, action-heavy roles designed to take advantage of his performance as Superman. Reeve, not wanting to be typecast, was thrilled when something different came his way, and he signed on to Somewhere in Time because it would require more range and less physicality. Ironically, though, a major factor in his being offered the role was a physical one. At 6'4", he towers over other people the way Collier does in the novel. The female lead, Elise McKenna, was even more difficult to cast. Dozens of serious young actresses auditioned, but Swark was very particular about what he wanted. He wanted someone with classical beauty, grace, an air of mystery, and most importantly, good chemistry with Christopher Reeve. When Jane Seymour, best known at the time for her role as Solitaire in the James Bond film Live and Let Die, read the script in preparation for her audition, she fell in love with it and became determined to fight aggressively for the part. Her audition went relatively well, but Swark wasn't convinced to hire her until he saw her chatting casually with Reeve outside of the audition, inadvertently demonstrating that she had the chemistry he was looking for. Though it wasn't a determining factor in getting the part, Swark did ask every actress who auditioned if they'd ever been in love. Jane Seymour was the only woman who said no. If you ask me, Seymour has the most work to do as an actress in this film, as her character is the most dynamic. Over the course of just a day and a half within the story, the film sees Elise McKenna slowly open herself up, begin to stand up for herself, and then let her hair down, literally, to allow Richard Collier into her heart, even though we, the audience, know it is destined to end in tragedy. As such, Seymour is, for me, the standout star of the movie, and this is hands down my favorite thing she's ever done. Of course, I may be biased, since Jane Seymour was the celebrity crush of my father, who passed on his appreciation of Somewhere in Time and its leading lady to me, as well as anyone else who would listen. The last major role was that of McKenna's autocratic manager, William Fawcett Robinson. Christopher Plummer was one of the first to audition, and though several other actors were considered, including Max von Sydow, Plummer was always the top choice. The only problem Swark had was the fact that his two principal male actors were named Christopher, and both would turn to him when he called their name, so he took to calling them Mr. Plummer and Bigfoot instead. Other notable actors include Teresa Wright, who came out of semi-retirement because she loved the script and wanted to work with Superman, Susan French, who had worked with Swark on Jaws 2 and was coincidentally born in the year 1912, George Voskovich, whose character Dr. Finney is named after Jack Finney, the author of Time and Again, and Bill Irwin, who took a picture of himself at 5 years old to the audition, which was subsequently used to cast his character's younger self. There's also Blink and You'll Miss It appearances by Meg Ryan and William H. Macy. The opening sequence was also supposed to feature the film debut of George Wendt, who got credit despite only performing on the cutting room floor. And finally, there's a memorable cameo from Richard Matheson as the Astonished Gentleman.
Astonishing.
When filming, which happened throughout the summer of 1979, Swark wanted to delineate the present day from the past in a visual way, so he and his cinematographer, Isidore Mankowski, came up with a method whereby different film stocks were used. For the present, a standard modern look was achieved, but for the past, everything takes on a softer focus and a pastel color palette. For many scenes, especially during the montage where Collier and McKenna share an afternoon together, Swark attempted to recreate many French Impressionist paintings, prints of which he'd brought with him to the island. He also borrowed from French farces for a few sequences in the middle of the film. He and Matheson both agreed that the film needed moments of levity to keep it from getting buried by its own self-seriousness, and so they came up with a few different places in the film where a little bit of humor could be thrown in or improvised. There were some interesting challenges along the way. Most of the film was done on location on
Mackinac
Island, with a few other scenes done in Chicago, but the Grand Hotel, while welcoming to the cast and crew, was still open and filled with guests the entire time, which required a lot of tricky maneuvering. One way they made it work was to hire several guests and island residents as extras. To save money, several props and set decorations were borrowed from Universal's stock, but one place that Swark refused to compromise was on the costume design, done by Jean-Pierre Dorliac. Hundreds of costumes were created, not just for the main cast, but also for the dozens of extras and several background characters, with a lot of effort expended to achieve not only period-appropriate attire, but also attire that was appropriate to that particular area of America and for theater performers of the age. Dorliac's work was impressive enough that he got an Academy Award nomination for it. The cast and crew weren't able to stay at the Grand Hotel itself, but at a different location not far away, and they got around mostly by using bicycles. As a result, transporting film equipment was a significant hurdle. The crew was able to get permission to use a single vehicle for transporting the heavy stuff, but everything else had to be done by horse and buggy, bicycle, or even just by hand. One positive from the experience was the fact that the cast and crew were confined together on the island, which practically forced them to form an intimate, familial bond with one another that isn't typical of a Hollywood film. It was also a relatively small crew, both for financial and logistical reasons, and most of those involved had signed on to the project out of a genuine love of the script. Almost every interview I watched while preparing for this video included a moment where a cast member or crew member said they only agreed to do the film because the script spoke to them in a way that movie scripts usually don't. Given that the budget was so small, it is perhaps inevitable that the only people who signed on were people who believed in it enough to do it for less money than they'd probably have preferred. Regardless of the reasons, however, it feels like people were unusually passionate about this film, and I think that passion definitely translates to the final product. Speaking of which, Swark knew he needed to find somebody very skilled to put together the soundtrack, as music would be especially important for the film. Jane Seymour was good friends with the famed film composer John Barry, who'd scored among others Born Free, The Lion in Winter, and several James Bond movies. Swark and Stark didn't think they could afford to even ask Barry to do Somewhere in Time, but Seymour went ahead and asked, and Barry was shown an early cut of the film at his home. Barry and Swark consulted at great length about the film that night, with Swark insisting that it was driven almost entirely by mood, by idealized romance and lyricism, and Barry subsequently agreed to do it. Both men knew that Barry's florid, string-heavy style would be a perfect match. The centerpiece, outside of Barry's main theme, needed to focus on a piece of period-appropriate music that Collier and McKenna could share diegetically within the story itself. In the novel and script, Matheson had used a composition by Mahler, but for various reasons that didn't work on film, so Barry eventually settled on using the famed 18th variation of Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. It's important to note that Barry was, at the time, dealing with the recent death of his parents, who had died a few months apart. Barry admits he let his emotions do a lot of the work for him, something he usually avoided in his compositions, and he would go on to consider Somewhere in Time perhaps his most emotionally draining but personally rewarding film score. He even reworked many of his themes for other movies later in his career, most notably retooling the love theme for Out of Africa. Many people, myself included, think Somewhere in Time is simply his best work, and it's hard to understate how much the movie owes to John Barry. Without his score, the whole movie would probably fall apart. Early test screenings in Canada and the US went incredibly well, so much so that the producer, Ray Stark, changed the release plan to make it go wide, instead of letting it trickle through North America and build word of mouth. This would prove to be a disastrous mistake, because when the film released on October 3, 1980, it was a box office disappointment, grossing a mere $9.7 million, which while technically profitable, was well below expectations. Critics lambasted it as well, brutalizing everybody involved with some of the worst insults ever hurled at a major motion picture. To this day, critics don't seem to like it very much, and Swark attributes that to the fact that professional critics tend to be cynical, that an unashamedly romantic fairy tale movie like Somewhere in Time is simply never going to move a critic the way it will move a general audience. Other factors contributed to its poor performance as well. It released on the same week as The Blues Brothers, an actor's strike prevented the cast from going on the publicity circuit, and the studio didn't really know how to market it, giving it a weak trailer and not much press. The underperformance was a blow to cast and crew, especially Swark, and the film seemed destined to disappear into obscurity once it dropped out of circulation. Bizarrely though, it proved to be a massive hit in China, playing for an absurd 18 months in Hong Kong. It did have its fans in North America, and one of them was Jerry Harvey, the director of programming for Los Angeles' pay TV service Z Channel. After Harvey began putting it on Z Channel, it gathered a lot of momentum on other cable networks. Then, when home video exploded throughout the 80s, Somewhere in Time gathered an even bigger following. To say it became a cult classic is kind of understating how big its fandom became in the years that followed. A fan club popped up around the 10th anniversary of the film's release, called Insight, which stands for the International Network of Somewhere in Time Enthusiasts. To this day, Insight publishes quarterly magazines and organizes events about the film, most notably co-sponsoring the Grand Hotel's annual Somewhere in Time weekend. As with the unusually passionate cast and crew, if you find a fan of Somewhere in Time out there in the wild, or spend even a few minutes talking to somebody at Insight, you'll discover that fans have very strong feelings for the movie, and Time, fittingly enough, has done nothing to diminish them. It's not just women either, with Insight boasting that half of their members, including the club's founder, are men. I'm not personally a member of Insight, at least not yet, but I am an enthusiast of Somewhere in Time. Technically speaking, I don't actually consider it science fiction. Forced to be pedantic, I'd say it's magical realism at best, but primarily it's romance. But since it involves time travel, albeit in an unusual way, it qualifies for consideration as a sci-fi classic. Whatever genre you want to put it in, though, it's one of the best love stories ever put to film, and I'll fight anybody who says otherwise. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. If you've seen Somewhere in Time, be sure to tell me what you think in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and consider joining my Patreon, where you can get early access, see your name in the credits, vote on future topics, and more. You can also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you can find written reviews of plenty of other science fiction classics in both film and literature, including written reviews of Somewhere in Time and Matheson's original novel. Until my next video, in which I'll be covering my first sequel, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
Young woman, if you do not walk with me, I shall go mad, positively insane, and do crazy things to myself.